Porsche, one of the world's iconic car brands. Their 19 wins in the 24 Hours of Le Mans highlight an impressive racing pedigree that has stretched around the globe. With their success in the French Endurance Classic, it was only fitting that it came time for them to try to conquer another one of motorsport's Triple Crown events, the Indianapolis 500. However, numerous forces, both outside and from within the Porsche factory effort, sabotaged what could have been an immense accomplishment for the German automaker. Like all European automakers, Porsche is synonymous with road racing, but by the 1980s, they looked to emulate what Colin Chapman and Lotus had done in the 1960s. They signed a deal to field engines to Interscope Racing, a team they had plenty of success with already in IMSA competition. But their first attempt came at an awkward time in IndyCar history. Championship Auto Racing Teams, or CART, had been formed by team owners as a separate body to the United States Auto Club, or USAC, which had sanctioned IndyCar racing and the Indy 500. When Porsche first developed and tested a turbocharged flat-six IndyCar engine in 1980, CART was in its second season after breaking away from USAC to form their own series. Crucially, however, USAC still sanctioned the Indy 500 and came up with their own rule set, a lot of the time clashing with CART's rules for the rest of their season. If you're at all familiar with IndyCar history, you know that this procedure would be at the heart of what led to the infamous CART IRL split a full 15 years later. When USAC was in charge of the Indy 500, they attempted to balance performance by allowing a higher boost pressure to engines that were stock block pushrod engines, which were required to contain factory production based parts. After USAC meddled with the boost rules for the 1980 Indy 500, they took one look at the Porsche engine and deduced that there was nothing production based about it. It was a full-on race engine. Porsche would not get the boost help, making the engine uncompetitive before it could even turn a lap in competition. Why did that happen? The prevailing story is that AJ Foyt, the last remaining big star who had yet to defect from USAC to CART, became concerned that the Porsche engine would be more competitive than his Cosworth was. USAC officials, aware of what upsetting Foyt might do, asked Porsche if they would consider being a customer engine supplier to more teams than just Interscope. Porsche replied that they weren't, and with officials lowering their maximum boost pressure, withdrew from the 1980 Indy 500. Porsche higher-ups were already uneasy about returning to open-wheel racing after famously withdrawing from Formula 1 after 1962. This made them reconsider the entire program once again, but only for a little while. By 1987, they were ready to try again. The team would be run entirely by the North American arm of Porsche. This time, CART stood alone as the real IndyCar series, yet USAC still controlled the Indy 500. In the meantime, Porsche had returned to F1 as an engine supplier under the tag banner for McLaren and saw great success in the turbo era. Their next go at Indy, they hoped, would go similar. Porsche made the bold decision to forego partnering with any team, choosing to start a factory effort with not only their own engine, but their own chassis as well. This was going to be a full-fledged Porsche open-wheel operation entirely. However, this plan got off to an awkward start when they showed up to the final two races of 1987 at Laguna Seca and Miami and were well off the pace, even with a legend like Alonso Sr. behind the wheel. They were in for a rude awakening, and they quickly abandoned the idea of using their own chassis, opting for a March chassis instead. For 1988, they signed Teo Fabi, the Italian who had spent the 1980s bouncing between IndyCar and F1 seemingly every other year. While a steady pair of hands, the season was a struggle. A disappointing DNF at Indy highlighted a tough season of mechanical gremlins. A best finish of 4th at Nazareth left Fabi 10th in the standings by season's end. In 1989, Fabi returned, but this time a lot of the mechanical gremlins had been ironed out. The big reason for this was that Porsche had worked with March Engineering directly to develop a chassis specifically for their engine, which was totally legal back then. In that era of IndyCar, there actually was chassis and engine freedom and development, something that sorely lacks in the series of today. As it turns out, this all came together for Fabi to finish 4th in the standings and claim Porsche's only victory in IndyCar at Mid-Ohio that season. However, the Porsche board of directors once again saw that the team only mustered an early DNF in the Indy 500, which put a stain on a great season. The special March chassis was competitive and provided Fabi enough to win with. However, The team was nowhere to be found at the one race that appealed to a grand audience, the one race that mattered more than any others. A mediocre qualifying followed up by early exits. It was like Porsche was a ghost at the speedway, like they weren't even there. But overall, over the course of the entire season, they fit right in. For 1990, something special was on the horizon, but it simply was not meant to be. Porsche rolled out the brand new March 90P, a car that was supposed to be way ahead of the field with F1 style carbon fiber everywhere, low to the ground, unique aero bits the team was confident in. Unfortunately, just like in 1980, Porsche got the short end of the stick. Kart officials ruled that the car was not safe and could not run unless changes were made. While Kart made that call on safety grounds, many believe that other chassis suppliers like Lola and specifically Penske, who quite literally controlled Kart, took issue with it from a competition and cost standpoint. It doesn't really pass the smell test when carbon fiber is much safer and every series in the world uses it in some form today. Porsche decided to rebuild the chassis to the same spec using traditional aluminum instead of carbon fiber, but this threw off their understanding of the car and it was uncompetitive in testing. They spent the early part of the season running the 1989 car and it was starting to fall behind in pace. At Indianapolis, the 1990 car was brought back out, but Fabi retired with transmission failure and teammate John Andretti crashed out. The rest of the season lacked big results. Fabi took the pole at Denver, but brake failure ended his chances of winning that race. Porsche, perhaps put off by Kart's meddling, withdrew from IndyCar at the end of 1990, and despite rumors, have never returned to chase the dream of the Indianapolis 500. So what do you think? Was Porsche a victim of questionable officiating? I think officials in both USAC in 1980 and Kart in 1990 were simply afraid of Porsche. The reasons for that can be debated over and over. However, at the end of the day, when they encountered resistance, Porsche tucked tail and ran. The company just decided to stick with sports car and endurance racing, which has always served them well. Perhaps one day they'll be back in American open wheel racing, but the days of a big factory effort like that coming in are long gone. So was it sabotage, or just a big corporation upset they couldn't get their way? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.